did want to talk about another topic tonight as well, and it's very important that even in the midst of this budget set of negotiations that are going on, that we not overlook the fact that the State Department recently released its its annual report on human rights around the world. This report, spanning 194 countries, calls out those governments that routinely and brazenly violate their stated commitments to universal human rights. I think it's important that we draw back the veil on cruelty that's often perpetuated by the world's most powerful against the world's most vulnerable, and appropriately elevate the issue of human rights in our national dialogue as well as our international diplomatic efforts. The report again spans 194 countries, and to the extent it is available, the reports detail the prevailing human rights conditions over the past year. First, let me start with some good news. Of the countries surveyed, Colombia, Guinea, and Indonesia stand out for notable human rights improvements. The first democratically elected president since independence in 1958, and consistent improvements across a range of indicators respectively in those countries. Countries where human rights conditions, very sadly, prompt serious concerns over the past year include the Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, where vicious fighting in recent weeks pursuant to a contested election has claimed numerous lives. In addition, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where rape is used as a political weapon. Iran, which still supports the stoning of women. Russia, which routinely and often violently suppresses the freedom of the press. And China, which has a history of forced abortion and euthanasia, as well as sterilization, to its demographic detriment. Other countries highlighted in particular this year include Nigeria, Sudan, Zimbabwe, Burma, Cambodia, North Korea, Vietnam, Belarus, Ukraine, Bahrain, Iran, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, where rapid deterioration of civil rights and evidence of tightening dictatorial rule are particularly tragic. The fundamental message that this report conveys to the world is that responsible governance rests upon two pillars. The first is a respect for human rights, and the second is a respect and responsibility for the rule of law. No society can flourish and prosper without these important transcendent principles, as they are exercised in the form of religious liberty, freedom of speech, the right of assembly and peaceful protest, as well as fair and free commerce. The Human Rights Report describes abuses that shock the conscience and tear at the elaborate fabric of the community of nations in which we live. These include ill treatment of dissidents, appalling prison conditions, extrajudicial killings, and as I mentioned, forced abortion and sterilization, policies that treat human beings like animals, violating their most intimate and fundamental human dignity. The report presents detailed accounts of systemic corruption, security forces run amok, acting with state-sanctioned impunity, kangaroo courts that condemn innocents without recourse, making a mockery of the rule of law. These dark trends are very often deeply entrenched, creating enabling environments that fuel violence and even genocide in some countries toward vulnerable persons and ethnic groups. The report addresses the barbaric scourge of human trafficking for sexual and other forms of ruthless exploitation, such as forced labor. The report speaks truth to perpetrators of heinous crimes of violence against women and children, and it highlights the feckless enforcement of laws to protect civilians against torture and other forms of cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment and punishment. Taking together with related reports on human trafficking and freedom of religion, this particular report on human rights provides keen insights into the state of the world in which we live today. But, Mr. Speaker, even as we consider these sobering matters, let's also recognize with due humility that the struggle here in the United States for the right to life, the most basic of human rights, particularly for unborn persons, as well as the terminally ill and elderly, and those suffering from cognitive disabilities that render their deplorable marginalization as, quote, vegetables, even in our most esteemed medical, political, and social circles, is a very deep problem that we must wrestle with here in our own country. Yet we have one basic advantage. This nation has learned through bitter experience that self-determination and reasoned discourse are far more powerful engines of growth and prosperity than subjugation by the nature of a police state. Sadly, too many countries in the international community lag significantly in the development of this fundamental ideal, the notion of a people having a basic say, having a voice in shaping the governments under which they live, and the ability to shape their own futures according to transcendent and universal norms of justice. Over the past year, as natural disasters summon us to compassion for people in Japan, New Zealand, Chile, China, Colombia, Haiti, Iceland, Indonesia, and Pakistan, as well as other nations ravaged by violent storms, including our own, we are witnessing another upheaval, a remarkable upheaval in an important world region which calls for our focused attention. The Arab Spring movement has been driven by individuals joining their voices, motivated by a common thirst to realize their human potential and the desire to secure a decent space, a decent operating space within civil society. This movement is emblematic of lessons learned throughout the centuries. History has shown us that rule by suppression in its various forms and degrees is very difficult to sustain over the long term, particularly now with the opportunity we have for the sharing of ideals and principles. State-sanctioned force and coercion against the innocent in various manifestations have tended to backfire against their enforcers and enablers sooner or later. The Human Rights Reports challenges today's leaders to shake off the archaic and destructive patterns of abuse that foster so much needless human misery, sapping the productivity and vitality of countless millions, perhaps hundreds of millions, Mr. Speaker, in our world today. As useful as these reports are, they do not tell the full story, however. As the difficult work of societal transformation begins for newly enfranchised citizens in the key countries of Egypt and Tunisia, for instance, many people throughout the world, in places like China and North Korea and Iran, continue to suffer silently, with no one to tell their story, no one to document their plight. They are far from the gaze of cameras that convey real-time images for all the world to see. But these reports hold an important message for us as well. In this interdependent world of shared technology, shared communication, travel, and commerce, we have failed to recognize a shared vision of justice. The United States is constantly called upon by the nations of the world to stand up against the forces of brutality. We are constantly called upon to engage in all matters of complexity that are causing human misery. And this really is due to three factors. It's the generosity of the American taxpayer, the philosophical ideals that govern us, that do not allow us to sit by idly when we see human misery and suffering, as well as the fact that we are an exceptional and unique superpower. Though other nations are growing in economic strength, our philosophical ideals and our historic role as that exceptional superpower, it is a bit ironic that the world still turns to us, even though many other economies are growing very, very rapidly, when people cry out for justice. So, Mr. Speaker, it's time to elevate at the table of dialogue and negotiation basic norms of human dignity and the governmental structures which will nurture and protect that dignity. Let those norms sit alongside the negotiations over trade, commerce, and security. For this is ultimately more valuable than any economic gain, which is transient and passing. Mr. Speaker, I believe it's time to focus on the permanent things, that which lasts, and that will be the legacy which we will leave to the future of our country and the future of the world. With that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for a motion.
Move that we adjourn. Mr. Speaker, I move that we adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
The House has gavelled out for the night. Earlier today, members passed a bill to